When the first German soldiers captured Mosin-Nagant rifles from the Soviets in 1941, they expected to find primitive, poorly constructed weapons. After all, Nazi propaganda had painted the Soviet Union as a backward and technologically inferior country. What they discovered deeply disturbed them. A rifle that functioned perfectly even after being buried in mud, frozen in Siberian ice, or covered in sand. While their own sophisticated weapons jammed in the brutal conditions of the Eastern Front, the primitive Mosin-Nagant continued to fire with deadly accuracy. This discovery would force the Germans to confront an inconvenient truth. Sometimes, simplicity trumps sophistication, and brutal functionality can be more valuable than refined engineering. The Mosin-Nagant was not just functional, it was a masterpiece of pragmatic design that defied all German expectations about Soviet weaponry. Weighing 8.9 pounds and measuring 51.9 inches in overall length, with a 31.6-inch barrel, this weapon fired 30 caliber, 7.62 × 54 mm cartridges at a velocity of 2,800 feet per second, effectively reaching targets up to 547 yards away. But the numbers alone didn't tell the whole story. What was truly impressive was its ability to operate in temperatures ranging from 40 degrees Celsius to 122 degrees, conditions that would render many modern weapons inoperable. Its 5-round magazine and simple bolt-action mechanism were designed not to impress in demonstrations, but to save lives in real combat. The first major surprise came during the Battle of Moscow, when Obergefreiter Hans Mueller of the 4th Panzer Division captured a Mosin-Nagant from a fallen Soviet sniper. The weapon had clearly been exposed to the elements for days, covered in ice, mud, and frozen blood. Mueller, curious about the enemy's armament, decided to test it. To his astonishment, after a basic cleaning of just a few minutes, the rifle fired perfectly. "It was impossible," he wrote in his diary. "Our Gewehr 43 had jammed 3 times that morning due to the cold, but this Russian thing worked as if it had just come from the factory." This experience would be repeated thousands of times throughout the war, forcing the Germans to question their own assumptions about technological superiority. The contrast with German armament was stark and philosophically disturbing. The Karabiner 98K, the pride of German engineering, was a precise and well-built weapon, but it required constant maintenance and specific care to function properly. Its tight tolerances, which ensured exceptional accuracy in ideal conditions, became a fatal weakness when exposed to the brutal reality of combat on the Eastern Front. German soldiers reported having to clean their weapons multiple times a day to prevent jams, while observing Soviet snipers using Mosin-Nagants that seemed to have never seen proper maintenance, yet continued to function perfectly. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, a veteran of the French campaign, described his first experience with a captured Mosin-Nagant. "I picked up this weapon from a dead Russian near Stalingrad. It was covered in mud and had a crack in the stock. I thought it would be useless, but my K98K had jammed again. Desperate, I quickly cleaned the Mosin and tested it. Not only did it work, but its accuracy was surprising. I began to understand why the Russians relied so much on this weapon." Weber was not alone. German field reports document hundreds of similar cases, where German soldiers adopted captured Mosin-Nagants as secondary or even primary weapons due to their superior reliability. The design philosophy behind the Mosin-Nagant reflected a completely different mentality from the German one. Where German engineers sought precision and sophistication, Russian designers prioritized functionality and durability. The Mosin-Nagant's bolt mechanism had wider tolerances, allowing dirt and debris to pass through the system without causing jams. The finish was deliberately more rustic, but this meant that small scratches and damage did not affect functionality. It was a weapon designed for peasant soldiers who might not have access to sophisticated cleaning kits or repair shops, but who needed a weapon that would work regardless of the circumstances. The mass production of the Mosin-Nagant also revealed a Soviet industrial capacity that the Germans had drastically underestimated. Between 1891 and 1965, over 37 million units were produced, making it one of the most produced rifles in history. During World War II, Soviet factories produced up to 2 million units per year, a rate that left German observers perplexed. How could a country they considered industrially backward produce weapons on such a scale while maintaining consistent quality standards? The answer lay in the simplicity of the design. Fewer components meant fewer points of failure in production and less manufacturing time per unit. Lieutenant Klaus, a military engineer captured by the Soviets in 1943, had the unique opportunity to observe a Mosin-Nagant factory in operation. "It was like watching a symphony of efficiency," he reported after the war. "There were none of the refinements of our German factories, but the speed and consistency were impressive. They produced functional rifles in a fraction of the time it took us to make a K98K. I began to realize that perhaps our pursuit of perfection was holding us back." This observation captured a fundamental truth about the difference between German and Soviet industrial philosophies during the war. The simplicity of the Mosin-Nagant also translated into ease of training and use. Soviet soldiers could be trained to use and maintain the weapon in a matter of days, while proper training for more sophisticated German weapons took weeks. This allowed the Soviet Union to mobilize troops more quickly and replace losses with greater efficiency. For the Germans, accustomed to seeing complexity as a synonym for superiority, this brutal efficiency was both admirable and terrifying. It meant they were facing an enemy capable of producing and fielding armed soldiers on a scale they could not match. Real combat experience revealed other unexpected advantages of the Mosin-Nagant. Its solid wooden stock not only absorbed impacts better than synthetic materials, but could also be effectively used as a close-quarters combat weapon. German soldiers reported cases where Soviet soldiers used their rifles as devastating clubs when ammunition ran out. The 8.9-pound weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, actually contributed to stability during firing and effectiveness in close combat. It was a weapon that functioned both as a precision instrument and as a brutal survival tool. Feldwebel Anton Kruger, a veteran of Kursk, described an encounter that changed his perspective. "I was in a trench when a Russian soldier appeared. My K98K had jammed. Again. He pointed his Mosin-Nagant at me, and I thought I was dead. But then he lowered his weapon and showed me how to unjam it. I don't know why he did that, perhaps out of soldier-to-soldier respect. But at that moment, I realized we weren't as superior as we thought." This anecdote, though possibly apocryphal, captured the growing sentiment among many German soldiers that they had severely underestimated their opponents. Field maintenance of the Mosin-Nagant was surprisingly simple. While the K98K required specific tools and complex procedures for disassembly and cleaning, the Mosin-Nagant could be completely disassembled using only a coin or the tip of a cartridge. German soldiers who captured these weapons found that they could keep them functioning with minimal resources. This simplicity was not accidental. It was the result of decades of refinement based on feedback from soldiers who used the weapon in real combat conditions, not on controlled firing ranges. The psychological impact of this discovery on German troops was profound and lasting. Many soldiers began to question not only the superiority of their equipment, but the entire narrative of racial and technological superiority that had been fundamental to Nazi ideology. If the subhuman Slavs could produce weapons superior to German ones in practical aspects, what else was wrong with their assumptions? This crisis of confidence spread beyond military equipment, affecting troop morale and determination. Oberst Heinrich Mueller, a regimental commander, noted in his reports, "The effectiveness of Soviet weapons is causing worrying discussions among the men. They are beginning to question whether we truly have the advantages we were promised." This concern was echoed in reports from across the Eastern Front, where German commanders noticed a gradual erosion of confidence in their technological superiority. The discovery that the primitive Mosin-Nagant outperformed their sophisticated weapons in real combat conditions forced a fundamental reevaluation of their beliefs. German adaptation to this reality took interesting forms. Many units began incorporating captured Mosin-Nagants into their standard arsenal, especially for snipers and reconnaissance troops. Soviet 7.62 mm ammunition was abundant on the battlefields, making these weapons practical for prolonged use. Some German soldiers even preferred the Mosin-Nagant for certain missions, recognizing that its reliability outweighed any deficiencies in accuracy or refinement. This pragmatic adaptation represented a significant psychological victory for the Soviets, even as they lost territory. The influence of the Mosin-Nagant extended beyond the immediate battlefield. German engineers began studying captured specimens, trying to understand the design principles that made the weapon so reliable. German technical reports from the time show a growing appreciation for the philosophy of functional simplicity as opposed to the refined complexity that had characterized German design. Some of these insights would influence the development of later German weapons, such as the STG-44, which incorporated principles of simplicity and reliability learned through the study of Soviet weapons. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, a Mauser engineer, wrote in 1943, "We must admit that we underestimated the sophistication of Soviet simplicity. Their Mosin-Nagant teaches us that elegance lies not in complexity, but in uncompromising functionality." This shift in perspective represented a significant evolution in German thinking about weapon design. The idea that less could be more was revolutionary for a culture that traditionally valued precision and complexity as hallmarks of superiority. Logistics also revealed unexpected advantages of the Soviet design. The Mosin-Nagant required fewer spare parts, fewer specialized tools for maintenance, and less technical training for field armorers. This meant that Soviet forces could keep their weapons operational with a fraction of the logistical resources needed to maintain German equipment. For an army fighting on multiple fronts with stretched supply lines, this logistical efficiency represented a significant strategic advantage that the Germans were beginning to recognize and envy. The accuracy of the Mosin-Nagant, initially underestimated by the Germans, proved to be more than adequate for most combat situations. While it might not match the laboratory accuracy of the K98K in ideal conditions, its practical accuracy in field conditions was often superior due to its reliability. A hit with a functioning Mosin-Nagant was infinitely more valuable than a perfect shot with a jammed K98K. This practical lesson about the difference between theoretical precision and real effectiveness would be one of the most valuable the Germans learned during the war. Hauptmann Ernst Wagner, a pre-war shooting instructor, reported, "I tested a captured Mosin-Nagant against my own K98K under various conditions. In ideal conditions, my weapon was superior. But when we introduced mud, rain, extreme cold, or prolonged use without cleaning, the Mosin-Nagant consistently outperformed the K98K. I realized we had been optimizing for the wrong conditions." This insight captured the essence of the philosophical difference between the two designs. One optimized for maximum performance in ideal conditions, the other optimized for consistent performance in adverse conditions. The Mosin-Nagant's ammunition also impressed the Germans. The 7.62 4mm cartridge, developed in 1891, demonstrated exceptional stopping power and stable trajectory even at long distances. German soldiers using captured Mosin-Nagants often commented on the punch of the Soviet ammunition compared to their own cartridges. The longevity of the cartridge design, still in military use today, testified to the quality of Soviet ballistic engineering, another aspect that challenged German perceptions of Soviet technological inferiority. Soviet sniper training with the Mosin-Nagant also revealed a systematically different approach from the German one. While the Germans focused on creating a few highly trained elite snipers, the Soviets produced large numbers of competent marksmen using the Mosin-Nagant as their base platform. This democratization of precision meant that virtually any Soviet soldier could become an effective threat at long distances with relatively basic training. For the Germans, accustomed to seeing precision as the domain of specialists, this approach was both effective and disturbing. The famous sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, with 309 confirmed kills using a Mosin-Nagant, became a symbol of this democratic effectiveness. German soldiers on the Sevastopol front developed a grudging respect for her skill, referring to her as Lady Death. The fact that a woman using a primitive weapon could cause so much terror among experienced German troops forced a fundamental re-evaluation of their assumptions about superiority. It wasn't just the equipment that was being questioned, but the entire hierarchy of values that placed technical sophistication above practical effectiveness. The adaptability of the Mosin-Nagant for different roles was also impressive. The same basic weapon could be configured as a standard infantry rifle, a sniper weapon with a telescopic sight, or even an anti-tank weapon with special ammunition. This versatility contrasted with the German tendency to create specialized weapons for each specific function. The Germans began to realize that flexibility could be more valuable than specialization, especially in a war where circumstances were constantly changing and resources were limited. The most disturbing discovery for many German soldiers was that the Mosin-Nagant represented not just an effective weapon, but a fundamentally different philosophy of war. It was a weapon designed for total war, where survival and functionality mattered more than elegance or refined precision. This philosophy reflected a deeper understanding of the nature of modern warfare, brutal, prolonged, and decided as much by endurance as by technical skill. For German soldiers raised in the tradition of rapid, decisive warfare, this revelation was deeply destabilizing. General Heinz Guderian, in his post-war memoirs, wrote, "We underestimated not only Soviet industrial capacity, but their understanding of the nature of the war we were fighting. Their weapons, including the ubiquitous Mosin-Nagant, were designed for a war of attrition that they understood better than we did." This admission from one of Germany's leading strategists captured the magnitude of the re-evaluation forced by the experience with Soviet armament. It was not just a matter of underestimating technical quality, but of failing to comprehend the strategy behind the design. The field maintenance of the Mosin-Nagant in extreme conditions became almost legendary among German troops. Stories circulated about Soviet rifles that continued to function after being buried in snow for weeks, submerged in swamps, or exposed to artillery bombardments. While some of these stories were exaggerated, the factual basis was solid enough to create a reputation for indestructibility that profoundly affected German morale. Facing an enemy armed with indestructible weapons created a sense of futility that spread beyond purely tactical considerations. The legacy of this German discovery about the Mosin-Nagant extended far beyond World War II. The lesson that simplicity and reliability could overcome sophistication and precision would influence weapon design for decades. The concept of good enough, sufficiently good for the task, became a legitimate consideration in military design, balancing ideal performance with real-world practicality. This philosophical shift can be seen in later weapons like the AK-47, which applied the same principles of rugged simplicity that made the Mosin-Nagant so effective. The German experience with the Mosin-Nagant also highlighted the importance of truly understanding one's enemy, rather than relying on stereotypes and propaganda. The assumption that technological superiority guaranteed military superiority proved to be dangerously simplistic. Modern warfare, as demonstrated by the Mosin-Nagant, was decided by a complex interaction of factors including reliability, ease of production, logistical simplicity, and suitability for real combat conditions, not just by technical sophistication in ideal conditions. Today, the Mosin-Nagant continues in use in conflicts around the world, more than 130 years after its initial design. This extraordinary longevity serves as a final testament to the validity of the principles that so surprised the Germans, that robust functionality and elegant simplicity can be more enduring than refined complexity. For the German soldiers who first encountered this primitive weapon on the frozen fields of Russia, it represented a humbling but valuable lesson about the dangers of technological arrogance and the importance of respecting the ingenuity of their adversaries. The German surprise with the Mosin-Nagant ultimately became a lesson about the nature of true military superiority, not the kind that impresses in demonstrations, but the kind that saves lives when it matters most.